Hi, today we'll take a look at how I use this Eurorack case to sequence the Digitone using MIDI. If you want to use Eurorack to sequence your other gear, there are a few options available, ranging from modules that let you simply send CV into a computer, letting your DAW or software like VCVRack convert those signals into MIDI data. For example, here's the BoardBrain's Optex module and the Expert Sleeper's ES9, which both allow for input and output of Eurorack signals without any conversion into MIDI. Another option is a dedicated CV to MIDI module. These are slightly more rare in comparison to the multitude of MIDI to CV modules, but they do exist. Befaco has a couple MIDI conversion modules, including the VCMC and the CV thing. I had a VCMC, but I personally found it a little fussy for sending MIDI note data, but it was perfect for sending modulation and CC signals. And finally, a great option is using the awesome Swiss Army knife module, Ornament and Crime. While its stock firmware doesn't have any MIDI options, the wide range of Hemispheres variants do include various MIDI applets. One option is the Captain MIDI applet, which takes over the entire device and gives you full input and output options. And what I'm using here is the latest version of the Freezerville variant of Hemispheres. And that includes a MIDI in and MIDI out applets, which are individually selectable. And it also has built-in support for receiving MIDI clock over USB and using that to drive any of the various clockable applets and tools that are built into the firmware. So I alluded to this a little bit, but how do we get to the caramel center, the MIDI center of this module? Well, conveniently, the Teensy board that the Ornament and Crime is built around has a USB port, and it supports the USB MIDI standard. So you plug in the cable, and hey presto, we've got a cheap and reliable MIDI interface in Eurorack. So how do I get it sequencing my Digitone or other hardware devices? What if DAWless jamming is my jam? Well, here you have some options. Do you want to be completely DAWless? Then you need a MIDI host device, like this one from Dori MIDI. Plug in the USB into the port, and with a little magic, you have some 5-pin MIDI DIN ports for hooking up to your other hardware. This is a pretty chunky device, so you could get something a little slimmer, like the RK006. I don't personally have one, but I can point you towards a nice video from Stephen McLeod of All My Friends Are Synths, where he goes over using one. I also had a wacky idea of using a USB OTG cable, which Teensy supposedly supports, but I haven't been able to get it working. In theory, this would let you plug directly into the Digitone or an M8 or something like that without any intermediary devices needed. And maybe this is something that needs some extra tinkering in the firmware, or maybe it just doesn't work alongside USB MIDI. If you know anything about that, let me know. Otherwise, I'll keep tinkering with the firmwares and see if I can get anything working there. If you're not into the DAWless workflow, then the best option really is to plug Ornament and Crime directly into a computer and use your DAW to route the MIDI. I personally like this way the best, as it allows me to both record the MIDI coming in for other uses, and I can filter it and process it in Ableton. Specifically, I run the MIDI through a note quantizer, because even though I'm using a quantizer module here in Eurorack, the analog to digital conversion process can occasionally get a little bit glitchy and throw notes out of key every now and then. If I use that, I could do away with the hardware quantizer entirely, but I do like getting close enough in hardware. As for the other modules used in the pieces, I experimented using some of the other random sequencer modules I have, like the Qubit Bloom and the Clank Chaos, but in the end I went with my old faithful, the Mutable Instruments marbles, or rather my smaller version, Pachinko. It's clocked by the MIDI in applet, and that's driven by Ableton over USB, and the marbles sends data into the Shakmat Bar Quartet quantizer. And from there, we go into the MIDI out applet in Element and Crime and into Ableton. And from there, the Digitone is simply connected via Overbridge, and like I said, the MIDI is routed into it from Ableton. Recording the MIDI is handy. For instance, in the second piece of the 3 parts, I recorded the MIDI as it came in, and then I used it later on to sequence the a bass line using the Hive VST. And that's about it. I'm a big fan of the Ornament and Crime module. I have 2 of them, especially using the newer firmware forks like Phaserville. And I got a few ideas of my own for new weird sequencer applets to put on here, so stay tuned for those if I find the time to cook them up. Otherwise, let me know if you'd like to see more weird hardware and Eurorack sequencing ideas, and thanks for watching. Cheers!